All right, well, let's get this party started. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me on this webcast. First, before I say anything else, could you please let me know in one of the chat windows? If you're in Google Hangouts, there's the group chat. If you're on the YouTube site, there's the video chat. Could you please give me a thumbs up or some indication that you can hear my voice and see the screen share okay? What you should see on your screen is my title card, Azure Log Analytics Explained. And I'd hate to spend an hour speaking into the void. That's not going to be worth your while very much. Just give me a thumbs up if you would. I'll also put a chat message because it occurred to me that I could be speaking, and if you can't hear me, this is kind of worthless. So let me put in, can you hear me in the chats? I'd really appreciate that feedback. And while I'm waiting for that feedback, funny little story. I was looking in the Google Hangouts controls, where the heck is the option to record? And then I realized by its very nature, thank you, Laman. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Thank you for that feedback. But I was looking for the recording control, and then I realized, wait a minute, by its very nature, YouTube is recording. All right, well, let's get this going here. My idea was to spend some time with you, and this is meant to be a discussion. Any questions that come to mind, pop them in whatever chat window you have in front, and I'll address everything I see. But I wanted to discuss Microsoft Azure's monitoring strategy because particularly there's quite a bit of confusion I've observed in terms of figuring out what OMS is and what it was, what it's supposed to be, how that relates to log analytics, how that relates to advanced analytics, how that relates to Azure Log Analytics. It's a confusing story. So I'm going to use just a demonstration approach to walk you through that from front to end or front to back. And again, I've got my other eye. I've got one eye on my sharing screen and my other eye on the chat windows. So any questions that come up, please. That's why I wanted to conduct this. I put together a links list of what I think are the highest impact Azure Log Analytics resources. You can download it. It's a simple text file, timw.info/OMS. In fact, I've got an instance of it right here on my screen. Let me move it off to the side. It's just simply a run of, like I said, some links that may be a little difficult to find otherwise, and we'll probably refer to most of these as we go through the demo. Just FYI, in Visual Studio Code, you can install an extension called, let's see, I think it's called, maybe it's down at the bottom. Yeah, there it is, Link for VS Code, which allows you to control-click links directly from the text file and pop them open in your default browser. So I've got my shared screen up on another monitor, and I'm seeing very little latency, and that's always a good thing. But any issues on your side, audio, visual, let me know. All right, so first, what's this deal with monitoring? You've got Azure resources running. These could be IaaS virtual machines. You could be doing database work with Azure SQL Database, Cosmos DB. You could be doing PaaS platform work with app services, and you've plugged it into an application insights instance. And now you want the ability to kind of check the pulse of your resources. And there's so many tools available. What's the deal? Well, I'll share my understanding of this. Now, if you ask 10 people what their opinion is on the Azure monitoring tools, what to use when, you may get 8 different opinions. So understand that I'm not a Microsoft employee, which is good, I think, for your benefit. Hey, Craig, thanks for joining today, because I'm free to give my opinion, and I am opinionated. Okay, so I'd like to start this at the ground level before we'll work our way into log analytics. First of all, at the resource level, we've got the diagnostic settings option. So for instance, in the virtual machines blade here, I've got at least one of my VMs running, this LS server that I created last night. And in the resource settings, we'll normally find something to do with diagnostics. So let me filter the menu here for diagnostic settings. And this is what I call the basic inbox monitoring. There's not any additional charge. And when you enable guest OS diagnostics, you get the ability to pull syslog and related stuff from Linux virtual machines. And you get obviously a wider range of things from Windows Server virtual machines because Microsoft owns the technology. But you've got your perfmon key counters there. You've got none, basic, or you could specify counters and sample rates. You've got access to the event log system, memory contents if the virtual machine crashes, syncs. This is relatively new. You can send diagnostic data to application insights. And application insights historically has been a way to look at telemetry info for your app services web apps. Agent refers to where you're storing that data. By default, the lowest level VM diagnostics uses a traditional Azure storage account and it'll write some data into the table service. Is it blurred, Paul? Thank you for that feedback. Let me see if I can adjust the threshold here. I'm going to choose Auto HD. It was on medium quality. I bumped it up to Auto HD. Let's see if that makes a difference. Let me know. I'll also mouse zoom to increase the size of things a bit. Yeah, because blur is never good. Let me see if there's anything I can flip on the back end side. Okay. Well, I've got my fingers crossed that this is helping at least a little bit. But as I was saying, you're using a storage account, and the idea here is that it's free, it's inbox monitoring, but it's kind of a pain. You need to use something like Azure Storage Explorer to go look at the table service, look at the blob service to look at your logs. And the biggest weakness here is that it's one-by-one monitoring. Oh, Paul, okay, so if you adjusted the resolution on your side, it fixed. Good, glad to hear it. All right, so this is a weakness if you're managing several, 20, 30, however many virtual machines you have in your deployment. So it's not particularly useful. Now, the way this works at the VM level when you enable the guest OS diagnostics is through the extension system. And if we look at the extensions for the VM, you're going to see that we have something called the IaaS diagnostics extension. And that gets distributed automatically as soon as you enable the diagnostics. And you could go to the NSG or the network security group and enable diagnostics. You can go to the storage account. But again, you see the trend that it's up to you to go resource by resource by resource to enable that. It's kind of a pain, let's face it, especially if you're in a hybrid cloud. Let's say you have a site-to-site VPN. And so you have on-premises virtual machines as well as those running in Azure, and you want them all on the same monitoring page. So the next level of monitoring, one level up from resource level monitoring, is the Azure Monitor, which still has legitimate and good use cases here. Specifically, it's where we can easily plot metrics and where we can raise alerts. Azure Monitor under shared services here, you'll notice we always have new features coming in public preview. Remember that when a feature is in public preview, there's, I was going to say no service level agreement. It's a different SLA. Basically, you're on your own. Use at your own risk. So just keep that in mind. Notice that the metrics, we have V1 and V2. Basically, the preview version, the V2 metrics, to my mind, it's a cleaner interface. It's a little bit faster, and it seems to not want to load all the time. This is weird. Let me control refresh. Huh, that's really odd. Let me see if the V1 metrics shows up. The V1 shows up. And this is meant to be a way potentially to kind of work towards centralizing your management. So we can filter on our subscription, our resource group. We can multi-select different resource types instead of one off. We can actually round them up a little bit. I'll select virtual machines, and then we can come down to the VM level. Now, my Web 1 and Web 2 are not turned on, but still allowing me to at least view the metrics. That's interesting. And so this is kind of a front end alternative to going into the storage account level and looking at the logs and looking at the tables directly. And when you plot a metric, you can change the chart type. If you've used Performance Monitor in Windows Server, it's very similar. And you can pin the graphics to a dashboard and create a nice monitoring dashboard for your convenience. Let me see if the preview metrics is working yet. Oh, good, it is. Yeah, it does have some nice advantages actually. We've got the ability to a better UI for adjusting the time range, defaults to the last 24 hours. And you can plot multiple VM metrics on the same chart. So if you want to monitor CPU or memory across all of your web front-end servers, you can do that. There's an export to Excel option. Let's see what other kind of trouble we can get into here. We can clone it if you want to analyze the metrics along different axes. If you go to edit the chart, you can change the chart type and change all of the labels. You can really customize it to a nice degree of depth. And alerts is still useful to this very day. It's broken into classic, or what I call V1 alerts, and then the current gen alerts. I won't walk through the whole thing, but what's neat about the alerts is that it goes far beyond just like, let me know via email if my CPU utilization is over 80% for 10 minutes. You can actually kick off logic to remediate issues. Maybe you can initiate a resize, or if it's a PaaS application, a scal. You can do an Azure runbook, you can do an Azure function. So this has been expanded to make it more powerful, I think. All right, so you see the trend. We've got the individual resource monitoring, which is nice if you know you're troubleshooting just a single resource, but bad if you want more wide spectrum centralized control. We have the Azure Monitor, which is still a go-to for metrics and alerts, and activity log. But other than that, it still isn't a true centralized solution. By the way, activity log, if you're not familiar with it, is a nice audit trail. If you have multiple administrators in your Azure subscription and you want to pin down who did what when, the activity log is a good spot to go for that. It'll leave nothing to the imagination, and it has a nice roll-up up here of failed deployments, role assignment changes, errors, alerts, and outage notifications. It taps into the Azure backbone in terms of the region availability. All right, so that was meant to set us up for this OMS/log analytics business. Here's the way I suggest you approach centralized monitoring. It seems very clear that this is what Microsoft wants us to do from now on. And it all starts with something called a log analytics workspace. And if we do a search and go to the log analytics blade, we can create one. Now, right off the bat, we might be running into a little bit of a slippery slope here in terms of pricing, because these OMS solutions can be purchased or activated individually or as part of bundles. In fact, I don't know if we have any Microsoft people on the stream, but the Microsoft people I deal with on the Azure product groups are very allergic to that acronym, OMS. Microsoft seems very intent on ditching that acronym. Now, it's difficult because you still see references to OMS all the time in the Azure portal. Let me step back a moment, and if you're not familiar with what OMS is, let me give you the nutshell history. OMS stands for Operations Management Suite, and it's very much a cloud-based analog to the System Center data center management products. For instance, you have for configuration management on-prem, you have System Center Configuration Manager. OMS has an automation service that has a lot of those same features built in. Let me see, System Center Operations Manager, or SCOM. We have Log Analytics itself is a good analog to that. And this used to be an entirely separate product family, but over the last year and a half, maybe almost 2 years, Microsoft has gradually been absorbing the OMS services natively into Azure. And they're still in the midst of it because, look at this page you're looking at right now. This is a marketing front-end page. that explicitly mentions Operation Management Suite. I mean, I work for Pluralsight, and in my training, we're doing a lot of partnership courses, and Microsoft doesn't want me to refer to OMS at all, but for heaven's sake, I mean, my job as an instructor is to make this clear for you, and you have to understand what this means in order to do anything productive. It hasn't been fully removed from the portal. So I hope that that helps understand a little bit. There's also an important couple of docs. It's all recorded in that links list. I'll give you the URL to download my links list again at the end of this presentation. Let me see if there's any questions. Doesn't look like it so far. But this is an important page in terms of understanding a bit about the pricing. This is a PDF that you see. It's March 2017. So, of course, you'll want to check with your Microsoft partner or maybe even file a support ticket just to verify. But I got this PDF from this page. If you just do a search for Microsoft Operations Management Suite, you'll come to this front end page. And a little bit down the page under pricing and licensing, there's a direct download to the data sheet and also an FAQ. So I like to teach from this, even though the exact numbers may or may not be different depending upon A, time, B, what kind of subscription you have, if you're an enterprise agreement person or company, or pay as you go, if you work with a cloud service provider through the Microsoft Partner Network. But here's the deal. OMS services, what I'll call Azure Management Services or Azure Management Solutions from now on, are divided into 4 bundles: Insight and Analytics, Automation and Control, Security and Compliance, and Protection and Recovery. Instead of creating a standalone log analytics workspace, I would suggest that you just install the Insight and Analytics. Notice that the pricing here is per node. Microsoft considers a node to be a virtual or physical machine that's part of the workspace. One of the big selling points of log analytics is that it can stretch across a private cloud, and you can onboard your on-premises machines into these solutions and manage everything as a herd rather than as individual pets. And another advantage is you can integrate your System Center tools with these solutions. But Insight and Analytics, look what it includes. It includes the Log Analytics workspace. Log Analytics, if you dive into the pricing page for it, it has a free tier and it has a couple different options for paid tier. The difference is the free tier limits you the number of data you can ingest per day, and also it caps you, I think, at 31 days retention. Obviously, the paid tier has much larger maximums for that. But this enabling Insight and Analytics is going to give you the paid version of Log Analytics and a couple other features. Service Map is a way to visualize dependencies. You can load up your VM and see a graphic that lists every process on the box, every connection it has, and you can see exactly what services it's responsible for hosting, as well as ones that it serves as a client to. And that's good in terms of if you want to consider moving a VM, you want to make sure to isolate any dependencies before you do that. Network Performance Monitor, or NPM, is a way to get insight into your virtual network space. It'll always be monitoring your subnets and looking for latency and connection drops and this kind of stuff. Automation and Control is largely config management. You've got change tracking, update management, and the automation service. Automation is excellent for running PowerShell on a schedule or ad hoc. You'll notice down at the bottom here that Insight and Analytics can give you rights to use System Center Operations Manager if you don't already have it. Automation and Control can give you rights to use SCCM, Service Manager, and Orchestrator. Now, I say it can give you because there's some gotchas with that. That's why I would draw your attention to read that FAQ, that frequently asked questions, and ultimately check with your Microsoft support representative for details, because there's a lot of fine print with that, actually. The rights to use the System Center software requires an annual commitment rather than just turn it on, turn it off. and there's restrictions. For some reason, the cloud service provider or CSP certification in the partner network hasn't been allowed to do that SKU. It's kind of weird, but whatever. Security and compliance gives you, above all else, it gives you the full Azure Security Center. In my opinion, this is worth its weight in gold because the standard SKU of Azure Security Center gives you your just-in-time VM access and gives you the advanced threat analytics to where it can actually give you context. If you've got somebody doing RDP brute forcing against a VM, it can actually correlate actions. So whereas you might see isolated events, you can see that there's actually a story behind it. And then protection and recovery gives you your Azure VM backup and Azure Site Recovery, and potentially you've got access to System Center VMM and or System Center Data Protection Manager. That was a mouthful. You might want to review this video afterwards. So let's actually go through the workflow here and I'll show you how it works. So instead of actually doing an individual log analytics workspace, I'm going to just do a search for solutions. And this is going to take us into a blade, obviously called solutions. And if we click add here, we'll step into the Azure Marketplace. It's going to filter the view on management tools. And sure enough, it's going to show us those 4 bundles right off the top. I'm going to grab Insight and Analytics and we'll create it. Now again, like I said, Microsoft plans to eventually ditch every reference to OMS, but here it is right here. This officially is now called a Log Analytics workspace, so don't be thrown off when you see OMS. We're going to create a new workspace in this example. You can have more than one workspace. I suggest to my consulting clients, unless you have a compelling reason to get complex, I mean, if you really want to isolate your data warehouses, okay, but it's extra money. Just do one workspace and then point all of your assets at it, and you can query across them all. I always think as a metaphor to the J.R.R. Tolkien one ring to rule them all. Here, Log Analytics Workspace is one data warehouse to rule them all. I'll call this LS for live stream Log Analytics. I'll associate it. I think I've got a resource group for our purposes today called live stream. Yep, there it is. Going to want to adjust that. The Log Analytics service is not available in every single region because ultimately you're creating a data warehouse, and I would imagine that requires dedicated hardware. So you see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Just choose the region that's geographically closest to you and your users. And then it comes in at the free tier. So in terms of evaluation, you might want to come in at the free tier and kick the tires. And then if and when you decide to pull the trigger for production use, you can then come into your workspace settings and just adjust it there. Now look here, you've got per node OMS or per GB. Remember, I mentioned that these management solutions can be purchased a la carte or separately. That's what the per GB is. I mean, one use case with Log Analytics is not to do a whole package like we're doing here, but literally to create just a Log Analytics workspace and say, I want to bring VMs into it and just use the native capabilities of the workspace. I don't need any of these others. I don't want service map. I don't want wire data. In that case, per GB standalone would be what you want. Otherwise, if you're dealing with these packages, you'll want to choose per node OMS for your pricing tier. Anything else here? No, that looks good. So let's submit this deployment. We can check its status as usual up in the notifications bell. And once we've created this ground level object, our next task will be to onboard any PaaS and or IaaS resources to send their data here. And we're certainly not limited to resources in Azure. It seems pretty clear in most cases that native Azure resources have first-class treatment. What we'd want to do to onboard machines on premises, and you don't even necessarily need a site-to-site VPN for this because it communicates via HTTPS, is the Microsoft Monitoring Agent. Install Microsoft Monitoring Agent on premises. Let's see if that gets us to the appropriate docs article. Yeah, right here. Connect Windows computers to Azure Log Analytics. As I hope you've noticed, Microsoft's invested heavily in their documentation teams, and we now have, especially with the Azure docs under docs.microsoft.com, really nice tutorials, and many of them are open source, so you can issue corrections and extensions yourself if you feel like doing some free labor. No. So anyway, the Microsoft Monitoring Agent is a little MSI package, and there's a variety of this for Linux too. That's another value proposition of log analytics. The fact that, you can do hybrid cloud administration of on-prem and Azure resources. You can do not just VMs, but as we'll see, we can do storage accounts, we can do application insights and app services. It's really like one monitoring service to rule them all. But it's literally as easy as just installing or deploying the MMA on your on-premises machines and plugging in in fact, nowadays, the software may not require you to plug in. Oh, it looks like it does. Sorry, I keep interrupting myself. You're going to need your workspace ID and key, which you can get to in the workspace settings, advanced settings. And that's going to create the handshake between your on-premises servers and the workspace here in the cloud. So I guess that's still required. Okay, so now we can go to Log Analytics. I hate when this happens. I'm just making this as a little complaint off to the side. The notification said that this Insight and Analytics deployment completed successfully. Yet when I want to browse away, I get the scary message, your unsaved edits will be discarded. Oh well, I need to file that as a bug report. All right, Craig, what's the difference between MMA agent and OMS agent? As far as I can tell, it's just a versioning / rebranding thing. They're really the same basic idea. What was called the Operations Management Suite agent was what we needed to deploy to on-prem and/or cloud VMs to get them working with OMS. Now that we've got this rebrand happening and everything just in Azure, the term to remember from now on for the client agent is Microsoft Monitoring Agent. But functionally, you can look at them as synonyms, like V1 and V2. All right, let's go into our newly created Log Analytics workspace. Just FYI, we can hit that advanced settings blade and let's see what it gives us here. This is interesting because if you do have experience with the old OMS, this interface is literally a pull. It's using the old interface that used to be in the OMS portal. There was a separate web portal for Operations Management Suite, and this looks identical to that. But at any rate, notice if we go under advanced settings here, it has onboarding instructions for Windows servers, and you'd only need to do this for your servers that are on premises, where you need to actually get hold of the agent, and you'll want to make a note of the workspace ID and the primary key. As far as your Azure virtual machines, it couldn't be easier to onboard those. Let's go back to the Log Analytics settings again. And what we can do is scroll down the list under Workspace Data Sources. We've got virtual machines, storage account logs, which could potentially have a lot of good diagnostics in there. Azure Activity Log, which again is an audit log, who did what when. Scope configurations, which is a way to, as best as I can tell, it's in public preview, is integrate with your SCOM management groups and bring them in as a group as opposed to individual nodes reporting in. And then there's Azure Resources that we'll look at in just a second. But first, I think you'll be impressed with how easy it is to onboard your Azure Windows Server and/or Linux virtual machines. We can see right off the bat any VMs that are in our subscription. I have two that are connected to another workspace, so that's an important point. Remember, I would suggest you try to keep it simple wherever possible. If you can just do one workspace, do that. Otherwise, if you do need to unlink a VM from one workstation and link it to a different one, that's fine. You disconnect, break the connection to the old workspace, and then connect it to the new one. So this LS server, as you see, is not connected. So I'm going to click this and click connect. And what's happening under the hood here, it says connecting VM to Log Analytics, is that we've got Azure deploying the Microsoft monitoring agent automatically for us to that VM. And when this process finishes, we could, if we wanted to, go back to the VM and look at its extensions list. And we're going to have an entry there for Microsoft monitoring agent, and it'll show us the version. Okay, question. If I want to monitor logs on a VM for errors and put them into Log Analytics, can this be done? Well, yeah, definitely. This is all you have to do. Remember, I started the demo by going to the VM level and going into the diagnostic settings, and you can pick and choose the level of verbosity that you want to pull from the event logs. None of that is necessary if you're using Log Analytics. All you have to do with Log Analytics is create the workspace and then onboard the virtual machine, what we're waiting for right now, and all the rest is finished. It's like a set and forget it deal. As a matter of fact, something that I haven't found any documentation for yet and I haven't tested, but I want to mention it to you all, is at this point it seems irrelevant and redundant if you have a VM that A, has the local diagnostics enabled, and B, is onboarded to a Log Analytics workspace with the Microsoft monitoring agent. Seems to me we should be able to remove the IaaS diagnostics extension. I haven't tested that, and like I said, I haven't been able to get any confirmation on. I don't think it's necessary because I have created virtual machines, not enabled diagnostics for it locally, onboarded it into Log Analytics, and we were fine. You see what I mean? Now, as you see, I'm focusing on the VM principally because of time. I want to reserve as much time as possible for the query interface. But this general workflow stands for your other resources. Let me step back into the settings here. Your storage account logs. Now, Azure Resources here is really nice because if I'm understanding the feature correctly, it makes it easier to make sure you're not missing anything, you know? Whereas with individual resource level diagnostics, you have to go to each resource and turn it on and all this. Look here, under your Log Analytics workspace, under Azure Resources, look what it shows us. It shows us network security groups. It shows us Azure SQL databases, app service plans, and web apps under App Service. And let's see if we can just turn this on from here. Yeah, so it gives us a single pane of glass to make sure that you're not missing anything, either in an IaaS or PaaS scenario. Isn't that beautiful? I love that. I think that's great. So once you've reached that point, you know, you're rocking and rolling. We've installed Insight and Analytics. Technically, you didn't need to do that, but if you really want to go in with this cloud-based management, you might as well dive right in. As far as other management solutions are concerned, those other packages, I won't go through the whole thing, but I'll just get you started with it. It's the same basic workflow. We go into Solutions, go into Add. Let's say we're interested in automation and control. We can select this package, step into its creation wizard. Guess what the first thing it's going to ask us? Here it is. You need to bind it to a workspace. You would select the workspace that you want to bind it to. And what you're doing here is greatly expanding the management capabilities that you have. I mean, automation and control gives you kind of Windows Server update service in the cloud. That's how I kind of look at update management. Change tracking and inventorying, which is nice. That's part of System Center Service Manager, if any of you are familiar with that tool. And Hybrid Worker is part of the automation service that enables you to run PowerShell or Python scripts from the Azure Automation Service on premises. It's like an on-premises local agent. Okay? So at this point, let's say we've gone through and we've onboarded this. Those have their own management UIs. So you can tweak your update management, you can do your change tracking, you can do your automation. That's fine. But from a monitoring standpoint, now that we have this log analytics workspace stood up, we can now run queries and reports against it all. For this, I'm going to come to my log analytics workspace that I've had running for a while. It has a couple VMs piped in. I'm going to actually go into my VMs blade and start these other VMs to make sure that they're actually able to transmit their data into the workspace. So let's get into this, because this is another very big point of confusion and was a point of pushback last fall when Microsoft introduced the V2 Log Analytics query language. They really wanted to fast track their customers into it. And I know for a fact that quite a few customers pushed back hard on this. And what am I talking about? Well, let me explain. In the Log Analytics console here, ignore this OMS portal. This shouldn't even be here. It was announced last month that the OMS portal was closed, but okay, it's there. We're just going to pretend it doesn't exist. Under General, we'll go to Log Search. And what we're going to see is the V1 interface. We've got a bunch of sample queries. We've got, it's actually a nice interface. I've liked it. But it's not the current interface, even though it uses the V2 syntax. To help customers, if you've already got a bunch of queries written in the V1 query language, there's a conversion tool here, as you see. But what I want to get to is, if you're new to this, ignore this initial screen, because this is dealing with the V1 interface. What we want is V2, what Microsoft calls Azure Log Analytics. Confusingly, the documentation will sometimes call Azure Log Analytics Advanced Analytics. And if you do a search for Advanced Analytics, you'll see a bunch of stuff on machine learning and artificial. It turns into a rabbit hole. It really, no question about it, it's a mess. I don't envy the product groups at Microsoft who want to do this. They made a really good decision, I think, in re-architecting the query language. I think you'll like it a lot. They did a really good job in the interface. You're going to see it in like 30 seconds. But like I said, they fast-tracked it really quickly, putting it into the portal. And a lot of customers were really mad because they had a bunch of V1 queries stored. So Microsoft reinstated the V1 query and makes you click this Analytics button to click out to the Azure Log Analytics. Okay, and this is what it looks like. And this definitely is where I suggest you need to start your work and build your learning curve, not with what you saw in the V1 log search. I would imagine eventually, may take a while, we're going to see this as the default interface for log search and log analytics, but that's just my humble or not so humble opinion. Now we're waiting for the schema to load here, and I want it to load because I want to show you what it looks like. Specifically, any management solutions that you enable are going to be visible here. So if you did Insight and Analytics, you've got your network performance monitor data, and that gives you access to all of those data tables to be able to query, for instance, show me any virtual networks that have a latency of at least this value. If you've enabled the security and compliance solution, you can go into Azure Security Center. Show me all VMs that are not onboarded to just-in-time VM access. Show me any VMs that have had an RDP brute force in the last 2 months. You see what I mean? Not only can you go across all of your management solutions, and any that you've enabled show up in the table list here. So let's see, Security Center, yeah, as I was saying. And this schema shows you those management solutions. They're represented as what are called tables. And then each table has like a subtable and then individual columns. Now you can click these. Let me click the plus button to bring open a new query. And you can click these or double click and it brings it over. That's not particularly useful. I've got several suggestions for getting up to speed with this interface, actually. One is, let me go back to log search. Was there a help there? No. I've got it in that links list, as a matter of fact. So let me go back to the links list. It's called the Playground, the Azure Log Analytics Playground. Let me click this out. And you can get to this on your computer. I get into it on my iPad, actually. And it's a publicly accessible playground that has all of the management solutions already enabled. You're dealing with, I don't know how many VMs and PaaS services. Note in the upper right, we're guessed. This is not your data. This is Microsoft's data. And you can literally just play around. They've got a bunch of stored queries here, and it's a nice, safe sandbox to start to get into this. Let me see. What I'm not seeing are links to the help and the documentation. Let me come back to my links list. I've got a couple links that point to the Azure Log Analytics query language. Let me go to the index page here for docs.loganalytics.io. Yeah, this is the ticket, if it loads. This is an excellent page. As you see, we've got a full language reference for this new query language. We've got a list of different examples, both dealing with virtual machines and app services. There's a link to the playground. So again, these I think are the highest impact pages. Now, some of you know me through Pluralsight, so you may be a Pluralsight subscriber. Of course, I just want to state explicitly, this webcast for you is completely independent of my job. And I mention this course because I believe in it. But there's a new course by my colleague, Robert Kane. Let me look it up. Pluralsight Custo Query Language. Now, I've actually filed a issue at Pluralsight with this because I think the title for this is terrible. I think a lot of people aren't going to see that they can really benefit from this course. Custo is the code name, the internal code name for the Azure Log Analytics query language. Custo query language, or what Robert calls KQL. I think it's a bad title because if you do a search for Custo query language, you may find one or two articles, but that's not how the product is named. Microsoft, believe it or not, even now hasn't formally named the language, but I'm like 80% sure it's going to be called Azure Log Analytics Query Language. But this course is really good. I've just watched the first couple of videos. This first video, 80% of the operators you'll ever use. Really good, high impact. So enough of that. Let's actually start running some queries. Let me adjust my other monitor because I have some already canned that we can take a look at. Now, why did Microsoft re-architect this? I think in large part, they wanted to make it faster and more scalable. Because, you know, when you're querying a data warehouse, which is potentially a lot of data, gigabytes and gigabytes, or maybe even terabytes, performance is paramount. And they also wanted to make a query language that was accessible to everybody, whether you're a database developer, a DBA, a programmer, an IT ops person. So you're going to find that the syntax looks and feels like a combination of Splunk query language, if you're familiar with Splunk, and PowerShell, not so much SQL. The V1 language over here in the portal reminded me quite a bit of a mashup between SQL and PowerShell, but now it's much more like Splunk and PowerShell. So let's say we want to go into the event logs. Look here, as soon as you start to type, you get these really nice autocomplete help, and it's very fast too. The way you separate your commands is using the pipe character, just like we do in PowerShell or Linux for that matter. And again, I just pressed enter after event and it added the pipe, and then it starts to give us help here. So where functions just like SQL where. Let me see, project is if you just want to output data like a select star. We want to look across all event logs, say all virtual machines, and we want to project the different fields here, and it fills them in for us here. Let's say source, event log, comma, event ID. Whoop, if I can type, you don't need to type with autocomplete. Gonna click run. No results found. Now the VMs have just been started. They're relatively new. We could try this over in the demo environment actually to give us some better data. Let me see. Where was I? Let's go to the playground. Open up a new tab. Event, project, source, event log, event ID. And what you'll find a lot of times is that you can switch between table and chart view on the fly. It'll render the visualization right off the bat. So it looks like these are project source, event log. Well, this might not be a good candidate for a chart, but it's nice to be able to switch like that. Depending upon how many columns you include, you can expand each row to show you a list view instead of a columnar view of that data. If you just want to, again, shoot the moon here and you're not exactly sure of what table you want to search, you just want to do a search for error conditions regardless of the service, that's what search is used for. Like a free text search, but you're going potentially across gigabytes or terabytes of data. And it's supposed to be really fast and really scalable to do. Obviously, this is such a broad command, we would expect that it takes a while. Look here, it actually gives you a time code of how long the query is going to take to run. This wasn't a particularly good example, come to think of it, because it's so broad. I'll only let it run for a little while longer. Let me clear up a couple of these other tabs to make it easier to see also. There's our Pluralsight workspace, and here's our demo environment. Okay. That's taken a while. Notice that we can easily change the range from last 10 minutes to a custom time and date range. Of course, you can specify the time ranges programmatically in your query as well. I showed you before that you can browse through these tables and double left click them, but I find that just typing and the autocomplete works much better. The documentation link that I showed you a few minutes ago, you want to go through the examples to get some good ideas. You know, it's like anything else with this. You look for good examples and then modify them to suit your use case. For example, I'm going to literally just copy and paste a query from my notes. Let's say we want to look through security event logs where time generated is greater than 30 minutes ago and where the level, the toInt is a cast, where we're casting the data type to an integer level, is greater than or equal to 10. Now let's see if we wanted to bring this down where computer equals, and you see you have all these different comparison operators, equal, not equal to, and we've also got your friend and mine regular expressions. So we can use regular expressions matches if we're looking for personally identifiable data, or we want a pattern match on IP addresses, this sort of stuff. It's all available there as well. I wonder if this will actually give us some results in a timely fashion. It did. That's good. Now notice that you can save your queries. That's what the little floppy disk icon is for. You can share a link to the query, so you can share the query with your colleagues, because you know it could take a while to compile exactly the right query for whatever your use case is. And look here, the export's pretty darn interesting. You can do your old school export to CSV, either all columns or ones that you filtered on. I'll show you that in just a second. But look here, if you're interested in Power BI, there's a supported workflow here to take a log analytics query, bring it down into Power BI desktop, create a data set, and then put it up into the Power BI cloud service. There's a great article on that. Let me call that up. Azure Log Analytics Power BI. And it walks you through the full thing. Here it is. Import Azure Log Analytics data into Power BI. I mean, Power BI, if you've seen my Twitter feed, I'm Really fascinated with it. And the workflow here, as you can see, is you craft your query until it's giving you the results you want in Log Analytics. And then you download that query definition onto your desktop and you use the free Power BI desktop to create a data set and then any visualizations you want. And then you publish it into Power BI. And Bob's your uncle, as my friend Oren Thomas says. As far as filtering the columns, if we're not specifying columns, a lot of these have a lot of noise that you may not care about. If we come down to columns here, you can just pick and choose. You can do a select none and then choose specifically what columns you want to see. And then, as I said, you can export just those selected columns to CSV if you want to. Let's see. Anything else here? As I said, by expanding these, it shows you the columns in a list view instead of a column view. Let me see if I can remember another trick I saw. I think I saw it in Robert's course. Reminds me of Wireshark. Yeah, this is it right here. When you're parsing through the results, if you're looking through here and you're like, wait a minute, I want to add this to my query, you can actually click the little plus. And did it add it there? Let me get rid of that. Source system is Ops Manager. There we go. Isn't that awesome? So immediately we're able to really pare down the results of this query by drilling into the results and then adding that property in, and it looks like it comes in as a where event, a where filter. And so now we're suddenly down to, I don't remember how many records were in the initial query, but now we're down to 1637. And we're looking at all security events that took place over 30 minutes ago that have a severity level of at least 10. And now we're looking at just the host called Ops Manager. And then look here, account. You might want to even go further than that and look for a particular account. Neat. I hope that you have the general workflow on that. So long story short, there's going to be a learning curve involved, but this is meant to be a super fast, scalable way to monitor your data. If you want to visualize metrics, we still have the Azure Monitor to do that. And the V2 monitor that I showed you at the beginning of the session allows you to plot metrics from multiple VMs. You can do different chart renderings directly from here. Let me copy another query. I'll bring out another query tab. Notice it's a multi-tab interface. Here we're going into Performance Monitor, where the object name is processor and the counter is processor time. Again, this is meant to be as human readable as possible. You can also document these with C-style comments. This is useful. You save it, you share it with your colleagues, and you can all add to it. I don't think version control is necessary, but it's a possibility you could store this externally in a version control system. We've got a whole bunch of functions, summarize average by computer, and then there's a bunch of render options. Let me see if autocomplete drops this bar chart, pie chart, time chart, a reach chart. I don't know what that is. Scatter plot chart. I don't remember what this originally was. It was originally a time chart. So let me finish that and run the query. It's going to give us the visualization in a moment. Your query data takes a long time to complete. It's recommend. Yeah, okay. So it looks like it's too broad right now. So how else could we broaden this? Where time generated between start a week ago and now, well, we could just say less than. Whoops, I might have too many. Time generated less than ago. Less than 30 minutes ago. Maybe it won't give us anything there. Less than 1 hour. So you're accustomed to this kind of fine tuning if you've done work with the structured query language, for instance. Ah, okay. It's still giving us too much data. So I hope you have the general flow. Let me see. Oh, to a colorblind person like me, that's not particularly useful. Maybe scatter would be better for that one. All right, sweeping up the shavings. Anything left in the log analytics space that I think is worth mentioning before we wrap this up? Any questions on your end? I'm looking in the question thing and I'm not seeing anything. Just as a general guide, you probably already know this, but when you're encountering a resource for the first time, it's often a good idea to go to the quick start blade just to get a feel for what we're supposed to do. And just by point of review, after we loaded the log analytics workspace in, we onboard our data source, and then this needs to go away. And we've got some documentation links. Okay. Well, everybody, thanks again for joining. I'm going to give you your day back. This is recorded just by default because it's on YouTube. So I'll publish the link to the video once it finishes rendering and I'll make sure it's public. If you want the links list, I suggest you grab it. You can get a link directly to the text file at timw.info/OMS. My Twitter handle is TechTrainerTim. My personal website is techtrainertim.com. Thank you very much again for joining. I look forward to interacting with you in the future. Have an excellent rest of the day.